What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, January 14th, 2019, getting midway through the month here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones, put you on the air with your comments and questions. And our third hour guest today is Frosty Wooldridge. He's going to be talking about the cost of illegal immigration, not just in monetary terms, but sociological and cultural as well. So we're going to be looking forward to that. Okay, we're still in the middle of the government shutdown. It's now the longest in modern history. President Trump is still in Washington, D.C., trying to reach some kind of a compromise position with the Democrats, but he's having a great deal of difficulty because a lot of the Democrats are down in Puerto Rico. And they're down there partying with the Hispanic caucus. And they're just lying on the beach and flirting with the girls in bikinis and just having a really wonderful time here. Of course, they're all still getting their paychecks. They're not part of this partial government shutdown. They've got their money and they're out there just having a really, really good time. Okay, so Trump, of course, is out there redirecting the blame for the shutdown on the feet of Nancy and Crying Chuck, which I think is a good moniker for the two of them, because it's really down to them. There are a lot of Democrats who are okay with having the wall, but they're trying to follow the leadership, and that's Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And so it really does come down to them. So if you are part of that government shutdown and you are in trouble, having to get emergency loans to get the bills paid, that's who's to blame. The corporate media is trying to say this is all Trump's fault. No, it is not Trump's fault. It's Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They won't fund that border wall because they need lots and lots of illegal immigrants to vote in 2020. All righty, getting on over to the international news here. Turkey is sending more reinforcements to border with Syria's Idlib, and they're sending tanks, armored vehicles, and they're sending them over to the Turkish province of Hatay in the Syrian border. And it's the second day that they've been sending the reinforcements over there. So it does look like Turkey is getting ready to do something across the border against the Kurds. Trump, of course, is opposed to this. The Kurds, at least for a while, were our allies. And Trump doesn't want to just dump them immediately. Meanwhile, the Arab nations in the region seem to be accepting the fact that the Syrian war is pretty much over. And after 8 years of war and billions of dollars, Assad is still in power, and he's being readmitted to the fold of Arab nations. And so these other Arab nations in the Middle East, they're moving to reestablish diplomatic ties and commerce with Syria. They're talking about reestablishing air travel into Damascus. The key border crossings are being reopened. So life is slowly but surely going back to normal there over in Syria. Now, Trump has issued a threat to decimate Turkey economically if they attack the Kurds, after asking his NATO ally to mop up ISIS in the wake of the U.S. pullout from Syria. So it's kind of a complex situation. First of all, Erdogan is not predisposed to be friendly toward the U.S. He sees the U.S. as having been party to that failed coup d'etat a few years back and still offering sanctuary to the man that he thinks was really kind of behind the whole thing. But so Trump is out there with his sanctions rubber stamp out there getting ready to go after Turkey. Mike Pompeo, of course, is on this whirlwind regional tour aimed at reassuring allies that the U.S. is still in control, that everything is going to be just fine. He's not getting a good response He's not getting a good response. And Pompeo, of course, is over there trying to reassure the Kurds that, yes, Washington, D.C. is going to continue to take care of them after the U.S. leaves Syria. Now, so far, more machinery than men are leaving Syria. Some of the troops have departed, but not a lot of them. But they're pulling a lot of the hardware out of Syria. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it is an interesting little factoid there. Apparently, yesterday morning, the Wall Street Journal published a story in which John Bolton had asked the Pentagon to draw up far-reaching military options to strike at Iran. And apparently he's talking about an Iraq-style shock and awe campaign. And basically, a lot of the State Department, Pentagon officials are saying that it was almost cavalier in terms of how brazen it was. But that's the way Bolton is. Bolton loves the war. Yeah, let's just go on in. Let's just bomb the heck out of them. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Down in Venezuela, Pompeo is calling for regime change in Venezuela. Now, Maduro just won re-election. And, of course, the United States is saying, oh, it's illegitimate. It couldn't possibly be real. The Venezuelan people hate him. And they're calling on the Venezuelan opposition to stage a coup d'etat. They want Venezuela. They want Venezuela's oil shackled to the U.S. dollar. They've been wanting that for a very, very long time, going back to when Hugo Chavez was in charge of the place. And so their latest tactic is to simply declare arbitrarily that Venezuela's current government is illegitimate. Not that the United States really is set up as anybody's arbiter of what is legitimate and illegitimate around the world, but that's the attitude that they're taking. Over in Israel, Netanyahu has confirmed that Israel did carry out the airstrikes in Syria that were reported last week. They're claiming that the targets were all Iranian, and Netanyahu is claiming that they successfully blew up an Iranian weapons storage facility at the Damascus airport. Now, the reality is that Syria's air defense system brought down about 80% of the incoming missiles. There were 12 missiles fired, and they hit the warehouse over there at the Damascus airport. But it really doesn't change much of anything. What the Syrian army lost can be replaced with little risk. And Iran continues to supply the Syrian army very well and continues to do so. So Israel continues to basically bomb Syria to prove how butch they are, and that's about all that they're really accomplishing. But Netanyahu yesterday is saying that Israel is determined to take further action against Iran in Syria to prevent Iran's gaining a military stronghold in that country. And basically saying that the missile strikes that were carried out show the determination of Israel to keep Iran out of Syria. And again, Iran is in Syria at the invitation of the Syrian government, with the Syrian government's permission. Now, Israel has also attacked the southern front against Hamas targets in Gaza, and they're claiming they found another tunnel going into Lebanon. So they're just out there just attacking everybody. Meanwhile, Palestine is going to apply for full membership in the United Nations. And the UN, certainly the General Assembly, has shown great sympathy and support for the Palestinian situation. But the United States, through its Security Council veto, has thwarted every effort to do anything constructive for the Palestinians. Anytime anything comes up in the Security Council, veto, 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 veto. You bunch of anti-Semites, you. Over in the Negev desert, Israel is planning to demolish dozens of Arab-owned houses in the village of Namila. And the security forces which stormed the village told the residents to evacuate 15 acres of residential and agricultural land, which are scheduled to be recognized as part of the city of Rahat. And the Palestinians are saying this is provocative, as they have been fighting for years to get official recognition of their village, which infuriates the Israeli authorities, including the Minister of Agriculture. And they're saying that's why the Israelis have resumed this witch hunt against the village, along with others in the north of the Negev. And they point out Israeli occupation forces stormed the villages and attacked the residents several times last year. Meanwhile, once again, a group of Israeli settlers yesterday morning stormed the courtyards of the Al-Aqsa Mosque via the Moroccan gate, accompanied by a heavy guard of Israeli occupation police. Jerusalem sources reported 77 settlers toured the courtyards accompanied by rabbis and received explanations about their claimed temple grounds, provoking Palestinian Muslim prayers. Now, the prayers and the students of Quranic circles tried to defend the holy site, preventing the settlers from touring freely in the courtyards. And according to the Al-Ray Palestinian media agency, Israeli settlers stormed the Islamic holy site on an almost daily basis in an attempt to divide the mosque spiritually and spatially. And one of the things that they tend to do is they'll hold Jewish religious observances on this holy site, which the Palestinians, the Muslims, view as a desecration. So they're still arguing over that particular mound of dirt here. All right, the U.S. Secretary of State in Qatar has done a 180 and says it's time to end the Gulf diplomatic rift. Mike Pompeo said yesterday that this ongoing boycott of Qatar by 4 U.S. allies in the Middle East has dragged on too long. And apparently he's trying to basically bring the Middle East back into unity to aim them at Iran. And Pompeo said disputes between countries that have a shared objective are never helpful. That's certainly true. The only question is, what is that shared objective? And of course, from Pompeo's point of view, it is that they are going to go after Iran. All right, over in the Donbass, the Chief of Defense of the Armed Forces of Lithuania, Jonas Vytautas Zukas, is saying a possible escalation of the war in Donbass would be the worst-case scenario for Europe. If it happens, there'll be no return to the discussion of a political situation. It will be important to everyone, not only to us, but also to Latvia, Estonia, and to the entirety of Europe. He's basically saying that what's going on over in Ukraine could potentially mean a war all across Europe. Okay. Let's do that. Now, there's a story coming out of Great Britain. Remember Dr. David Kelly? He got dragged into the expose of the dodgy dossier, the sexed up dossier, and 15 years ago was found dead in an Oxfordshire wood during Tony Blair's time as Prime Minister. Now, the official story was the distinguished weapons expert had taken his own life by overdosing on painkillers and cutting his left wrist. And apparently devastated at being unmasked as the source of the BBC's claim that the government had sexed up the case for the Iraq War. But there were always suspicions something was funny about the story, and new evidence has now emerged regarding the death of the 59-year-old scientist. And a lot of people were saying, why commit suicide at that point? He had already finished his appearance before the Select Committee of Members of Parliament. He was basically out of trouble. And the new evidence that has surfaced is twofold. apparently, remember, Lord Hutton was handpicked to chair an inquiry into the death of Dr. David Kelly, which basically meant there was never a formal coroner's inquest, which would have had the ability to call witnesses and conduct scientific tests. None of that was done. Lord Hutton just basically came on in and said, yes, it's a suicide. The government didn't do anything wrong. End of story. In other words, a whitewash, a cover-up. Well, apparently the new evidence that has surfaced is that forensic experts have weighed on in and said that the cut to Dr. David Kelly's left wrist, he couldn't have made it himself. It's at the wrong angle. And the vein that it cut wouldn't have allowed him to bleed to death. More importantly, the evidence that has surfaced, the knife that was found right next to his body that was assumed to be the suicide weapon had absolutely no fingerprints on it. And of course, Dr. David Kelly was not wearing gloves. And there's a dead giveaway right there. So we had the same thing with Vincent Foster. The gun found with the body was absolutely wiped clean. So yeah, it does look like David Kelly was assassinated. Story coming out of Zero Hedge, basically talking about the very reckless and fact-free reporting on Russia in the American corporate media. And, people are building their entire careers on coming up with fantastical stories about Russia. It's all fake news, but it's good business. And if you get caught writing fake news about Russia, nothing happens to you. It's just pure propaganda. It's sloppy, and it's nonsense. And it's not what we would call proper journalism. It's just out there saying bad things about Russia, and they're trying once again to revive this idea that Donald Trump and Russia were in cahoots together against the American people. More about that a little bit later. Over in France, the yellow vests are still out there protesting. It is starting to get really intense. The police are using live ammunition now. The yellow vest protesters are using catapults. This is the 9th week of the yellow vest protests in Paris. And it's turning Paris into a war zone. They had 5,000 riot police on hand, and businesses are open, but they're boarding up their windows against the possibility of the windows getting broken or the possibility of looting by one side or the other. All right, here's where we go. Yesterday on CNN's Reliable Sources, Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame said his sources have told him that Robert Mueller's report is going to claim that Donald Trump has helped Russian President Vladimir Putin destabilize the United States. Now, there's absolutely no question that our country is being destabilized, but it's got nothing to do with Russia. It has to do with an obstructionist Congress. It has to do with the economic instabilities. But that's what Mueller is going to say. Trump and Putin are in cahoots. They're destabilizing the United States. That's the claim his report is going to make. And I can understand why Rudy Giuliani was out there saying that Trump's lawyers really ought to have a chance to look at that report and correct any errors in it. That's a whopper of a lie he's putting on out there. That's a real whopper of a lie. But they're going to drag that up again, and they're going to make it the news story for the next 2 years until the 2020 elections. I guarantee it. For the next 2 years, the corporate media is going to be all about Putin and Trump, Trump and Putin. They're working together against the United States. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So apparently this is the new tactic by the anti-Trumpers to say that Putin and Trump are swapping wet sloppy kisses or something. And the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which is now under the control of the Democrats, they're going to hold hearings on President Trump's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And committee chairman, Representative Eliot Engel, was talking about Trump's dark dealings with Putin and his cronies. And yeah, it's just I mean, it would be silly if it wasn't so serious. But Engel came on out and said every time Trump meets with Putin, the country is told nothing. America deserves the truth, and Foreign Affairs Committee will seek to get to the bottom of it. So the attack is definitely on. Lindsey Graham on Fox News yesterday was commenting on a New York Times report. The FBI actually opened an investigation into President Donald Trump after he fired FBI Director James Comey, investigating whether or not Donald Trump was a Russian agent. And Graham came on out and said, number one, that story came from somebody who leaked it with an agenda. I'd like to know who leaked it, because they have an agenda not friendly to President Trump, and I, for one, don't trust what I read in the New York Times. Well, that makes several million of us here. And Lindsey Graham said, I'm going to ask the FBI director, was there a counterintelligence investigation opened up regarding the president as being a potential agent of the Russians? I find it astonishing, and to me, it tells me a lot about the people running the FBI. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. If this really did happen, Congress needs to know about it. And what I want to do is make sure, how could the FBI do that? What kind of checks and balances are in there? And he's absolutely right. It was utterly ridiculous for the FBI, responding to Comey's firing, to open up an investigation if President Trump is an agent of the Russians. It is rather ridiculous here. And Donald Trump himself has responded to the New York Times article, basically with a tweet storm about the witch hunt. You know, we're going back to the days of Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare. Oh, you know, everybody's a commie. We've got to blacklist them. Now, President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, apparently has struck some kind of a deal. He's going to testify before Congress next month. And apparently, according to Cohen's advisor, Lanny Davis, he's saying that Cohen is going to describe Trump's frightening behavior, his lies, his immorality, and his willingness to abuse people. Boy, they really are going after him. Well, Donald, you wanted the job. Certainly the hottest kitchen out there, as Harry Truman used to say here. George Soros is out there on the warpath against independent media. And he's now, according to this 49-page leaked document, Soros has plans to use his immense personal wealth to pressure big tech to censor and purge pro-Trump journalists, citizens, and outlets ahead of the 2020 elections. He's literally out there saying online Trump supporters will be entirely silenced by 2020. I mean, George Soros, to me, is one of the strongest arguments for socialism, because it shows what happens when one individual gets too much money and they just can't resist the desire to play God, or at least play with planet Earth and its people like a personal toy. And I certainly resent people with that kind of money imposing their agenda on everybody else. All right, the House of Representatives voted 411-1 for a bill that will force President Trump to nominate an anti-Semitism envoy. This is a position that has been vacant since he took office. And the definition of anti-Semitism the position uses includes criticism of Israel. And the bipartisan bill upgrades the current position of anti-Semitism envoy to the rank of an ambassador and requires the job to be filled within 90 days. So they're going on an anti-Semite hunt, with anti-Semites being anybody who criticizes Israel for what Israel's government is doing. All of this, of course, is an attack on our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. The First Amendment says we have a right to criticize government, anywhere, when they behave badly. We've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go to the phones here to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, you know what's ridiculous about Mueller and stuff? I mean, they can just say, oh, him and Putin's working to destabilize the United States, and that's all they need to say. You know, they don't have to prove anything because there's nothing to prove because it's all BS. You know what I mean? Like, they could just drag this on and he's destabilized. That's it. If that's the final report, according to Carl Bernstein, I mean, that's a joke. I mean, I don't understand. Like, Mike, nobody believes this anymore because they used it too much. It's too much propaganda. It's overloaded. So it's unbelievable now, you know?
It is unbelievable. And all I can say is that, you know, Mueller's report, if it really makes that claim that Trump and Putin are working to destabilize America and there's no proof to back it up, it's going to get shredded. They're going to hand Mueller his report back in a body bag.
But it's just sad, Mike, because he is just part of that machine as congressional people are out partying because of the shutdown. You know, it's just, they live in this world. I don't get it. They just don't care. The lies are just blatant now, and they just don't care about how anybody else thinks. You know, they just all go along with it. I mean, Lindsey Graham, I wouldn't, Mike, I wouldn't trust him if I turned back on me. He's untrustworthy also. As much as he's coming to bat for Trump, he's got his own ulterior motives, per se. You know, him and John McCain. Well, you know, the past and John McCain. But you know, I don't trust Lindsey Graham, and I wouldn't put him in anywhere in a cabinet position. You know, I mean, but I don't know, man, Mike. I mean, what else is going to happen? You know, did you hear about this thing called NewsGuard, where former Michael Hayden, like, they're going to have an app working with Microsoft so they can tell you what news to go to. It's going to be green for MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, and all. I mean, come on now. That's like censorship. This is like fascism. I mean,
that's exactly what it is. You know, the independent media. I think the 2016 election was the wake-up call for people inside the government. They'd kind of sort of dismissed independent media. Oh, it's a bunch of fringe people out there, and they didn't realize how much influence we actually have until Hillary Clinton lost the election. And now, of course, they're on the warpath. Soros wants to shut all the independent media down, and they want to get the American people going back to the corporate media where they get their daily dose of propaganda or bovine excrement, depending upon your point of view. And it's going to get really intense out there. And big tech is fully on board. They want to control what the American people are seeing, reading, and hearing. They're basically making huge amounts of money steering the American population in certain directions, just like the corporate media does. So we have to basically work on finding other vectors for our information to get out that are not under that control.
Hey, Mike, remember back when Morgan Freeman did that infomercial? Remember with the Russia, we were at war. Remember? He did that stupid infomercial for that group. I forgot what the group was called. It's kind of like what the Integrity Initiative is. Remember? That came out like a year or two ago. Yeah. You know, it's like, but this is the kind of nonsense. Hamilton, wasn't it Hamilton 3 something or Hamilton? They had Ron Paul. They listed on one of the web, as a website that is Russia friendly. You know, I mean, but this is the same group of people. Essentially, right? I mean,
well, basically, yes. Basically, we have this cadre of interests in this country that want to go back to the Cold War. They want to have an enemy. They want Russia to be that enemy. And anybody who gets in the way of that agenda, they're trying to silence. Because from where I'm sitting, Russia isn't our enemy. Putin's not coming to invade us. He's got enough problems taking care of Russia. But the U.S. government, the military-industrial complex, they want to basically convince all Americans that Russia's our enemy, and then they can wave that enemy at people to get their money and to get their children to fight in these various wars all over the globe.
And Mike, if I can switch real quick, I don't know if you heard, but the 2 Russian subs specifically created for the Poseidon, there's going to be 8 Poseidon, those autonomous submarine vehicles on each sub, those 8, and they're supposed to have a 2 megaton warhead for each of the 8. Because I think the trials start this year, or they already started.
Yeah, 2 megaton sounds a lot more reasonable. I know when the story first broke, they were saying it was a 100 megaton warhead. There's only ever been one 100 megaton warhead built. And when they built it as a test, and when they set it off, they actually dialed it back to 50 megaton. That's how scared they were of it. But 2 megatons, that'll wipe out a city.
Yeah, I doubt a sub can carry 8. Like one Poseidon can carry 8 100 megaton. That thing would be gigantic.
It
right?
would be.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good rest of the show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And turning to the economic news, we've been talking about how the U.S. government is over $21 trillion in debt. Complicating that is there's another $21 trillion, which seems to have gone completely missing between the Pentagon and housing and urban development. That money just seems to have vanished. Nobody knows where it went. Behind that, though, there's another big problem nobody wants to talk about, and that is the unfunded liabilities, which right now, according to Gundlach over at Double Line Capital, that's $122 trillion. And these are promises made by the United States government for which they do not have the money. $122 trillion. That's a lot of money out there. Okay. Apparently, over in the hedge funds, there's a little bit of a concern that people may be losing faith in the economic system. Well, yeah, because most people are looking at the economic system. They're seeing it as clearly favoring the money junkies. They see the banking system as serving the banking system and not the people. So yeah, they're losing faith in the system. And the ratio of U.S. household financial assets to gross domestic product has never been higher. And so these hedge funds are out there saying that, if you don't own any assets, you're out of luck, which more and more people, they don't own their own home anymore. Most people are renting these days. Over at Pacific Gas and Electric, they're talking bankruptcy. The CEO is getting ready to step down. The costs from the wildfires in California, which are now known to have been started by poorly maintained equipment by PG&E, the lawsuits are just piling on up, and it looks like PG&E is going to be driven into bankruptcy. Now, for those of you with a long memory, PG&E is also the company that got caught up in that hexavalent chromium contamination in Hinckley, California. If you remember Aaron Brockovich and that whole situation, there was a movie made about it. And it was very reckless, it was very deliberate, and they didn't want to deal with the problem. So they lied to the people of Hinckley and said, oh, no, this stuff is harmless, it's not going to hurt you. And it did hurt them quite a bit, and they took a major hit on this. But in this case, the losses are going to be huge. And so it looks like PG&E is going to have to basically sell off its assets. Somebody's going to come on in and take it over. I think it ought to be taken over by the state of California. I think the public utilities ought to go back to being public utilities. Privatization has always been a disaster when you're dealing with utilities. The prices go up, the quality of service goes down, because instead of serving the public interest of providing power or water or whatever, it's turned into a for-profit money-making operation. Now, you probably have been seeing a lot of car commercials lately. And if you're like me, you're looking at those prices and saying, gee, if I actually had money, what a wonderful time to buy a new car. And it's pretty much that way for all the automakers, except, of course, for Rolls-Royce. We mentioned that last week here. But the U.S. auto market is officially in recession again. And factories are closing. Shifts are being truncated, layoffs taking place all over, and Detroit is showing more signs it's in the midst of a recession. Demand for sedans has collapsed. The collapse has been the result of most consumers who are able to buy a car moving to sport utility vehicles and pickups. The models that used to be the lifeblood of the car industry, like the Honda Accord and the Ford Fusion, only made up 30% of U.S. sales in 2018. Now, down here at the bottom of the hill, we have this old 4-screen drive-in movie theater. The screens have been taken down. It used to be used for a flea market. Now it's being rented out as an overflow lot for all of the island's dealerships, and it is absolutely full of cars. People just don't have the money to buy them. And people don't want to take out a car loan because they're uncertain about their wages and salaries. So many people are losing their jobs right now. Maybe Trump ought to do with the cars what Reagan did with the cheese. During the Reagan administration, there was a huge surplus of cheese that was built up all across the dairy industry. And they just said, let's just give it away. And that's what they did. They gave away these huge blocks of cheese, and it certainly made Reagan look good. So maybe it's time to start giving the cars away. Because if they're just sitting on the lot underneath the sun and the elements, they're not going to be bright and shiny and clean, when they get to the showroom anymore. But it is a major, major problem. The U.S. Ambassador to Berlin, Richard Grenell, is sending threatening letters to German companies working on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, basically threatening them with sanctions. And the reason for the sanctions is that if the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is completed, Europe will become dependent on Russian oil and gas, and that is considered a strategic threat to the United States, which wants Europe to be dependent on American oil and gas. Of course, we can't build a pipeline across the Atlantic Ocean. We have to use liquefied natural gas ships or oil tankers, which actually drive the cost of the oil up. But that's really what all this argument about the pipelines is about. The strategic importance of who is getting their energy from who. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I want to talk about illegal immigration, the prison system, and the wall. And I'm going to tie them all in together in a nice, beautiful little package for everybody because, quite frankly, I am severely pissed off. And anybody who's looking for answers and solutions to the problems, like that one caller yesterday into another broadcast, this is how answers are found by people like you and me getting fed up and thinking. We have an overcrowding population in our prison system. A lot of it is because people are in there for joints. You got 5 years for a joint, Seriously? Go home. That's my attitude. Let's get these kind of people, these nonviolent, you call them offender if you want. I don't see any problem with it. But let's get them out. Let's get them back home. Let's get them off the government tit. Let's get them off the taxpayer dollar. And I'll tell you what we'll do next. Next, we'll start. We're not going to go around knocking on doors looking for illegal immigrants, but when we find them, they will immediately go to a special holding center where they will be judged and they will be dealt with, and then they will go for whatever crime. We're not going to catch and release, so we end up with some EMT like we had last year, got killed by an illegal. No, we're not going to have any more Molly Tibbetts. We're not going to be doing this anymore. You're going to go to prison for your crime, and you are going to work. You're going to live in a cell. You're going to come out for 8 hours, 5 days a week, and you're going to work to build the wall. You will come back in the evening, you will shower, then you will go back to your cell, and that is where you will remain until tomorrow, when you will go out and you will work 8 hours again on that wall. You will do this 5 days a week. Then you will have 2 hours, either on Saturday or Sunday, to walk the yard and get some exercise and some fresh air, and then you will have 1 day of pure solitary confinement. And that is where you will sit, you will do your time until your time is served, and then we will ship your monkey butt back across that border where you came from. And I guarantee you, if we do this, we just solve the wall problem, we solve the prison overpopulation problem, and we solve the illegal immigration problem all in one foul swoop, and we can reduce some of that unfunded liability and take that money and focus it somewhere else.
Well, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, we're already putting the prisoners in prisons to work with the factory, prison labor. They run call centers, they manufacture furniture, things like that. Why not put them to work on the wall? Probably everybody remembers, the stereotype image of the chain gang, where prisoners were put to work maintaining the roads. So it's not that far-fetched. But I'll tell you, there's an easier way to do that, and that is to cut off all the free stuff that is luring those people here. That's what you need to do. If they're going to step across that border and they can't get food and they can't get money and they can't get housing and they can't get medical care, they're going to turn around and go home.
Yep, absolutely. Because they did some, the numbers came out earlier, I think about 3 months ago, that said it's roughly, all right, you talk about, it's about $70,000 per year per inmate. But it's about $7,500 per year per illegal immigration, or per illegal immigrant, and that is only in the cash. That does not count the food stamps that they get. It doesn't count the medical that they get. It's just
it doesn't. It doesn't. We're spending more birthing illegal immigrant babies than the wall. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and taking a look at the immigration refugee problem. Breitbart's Border and Cartel Chroniclers director Brandon Darby is wagging his finger rather hard at CNN's Jim Acosta, and apparently also social media postings by Texas Democrat Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke, who are out there trying to claim that the border with Mexico is safe. And this is part of this corporate media campaign to convince everybody that Trump has manufactured a crisis. There really is no crisis. We don't need a wall. Everything's just fine and hunky-dory. But if you look at the videotapes that are coming on up from that border, tapes that are made not by the corporate media, who are staging shots to try and build sympathy for the migrants, but just the people who are there documenting what's going on, you can see it is not safe. And in fact, it's very violent. And I remember that embarrassing situation when Trump was giving his Oval Office speech about the situation on the border and said that 1 out of every 3 women in those migrant caravans was being raped on their way to the U.S. border. And CBS's fact checkers immediately leapt on in and said, no, he's wrong about that. And then they quoted a source that said something between 60 and 80% of the women are being raped. and then they took it back down because they realized belatedly it was making the point Trump was trying to make. It's not a safe situation. But there's a lot of propaganda on the corporate media trying to convince everybody that it's a made-up crisis, that we don't need to worry about a wall, that having 25 million illegal immigrants in this country voting in our elections is nothing to worry about, and you're just being a racist if you think that there is. Now, Brigitte Gabriel is out there with an article, "You don't need Congress to build this wall." And she's saying if our present situation on the southern border isn't a national emergency, then nothing is. And just comes on out with the statistics. Every year, more than 500,000 people are apprehended trying to cross into the nation illegally. And that's just the 500,000 who get caught. There are a lot more who don't. And there was that Yale study that came on out saying right now there are 25 million illegal immigrants in this country competing for jobs with legal American citizens or living on welfare and food stamps or getting all kinds of free stuff by the Democrats in order that they'll vote Democrat in the future, even though they're not supposed to vote. The Pentagon is finalizing plans that would send hundreds of additional active duty troops to the U.S.-Mexico border for several more months to support the Department of Homeland Security. They're going to install another 160 miles of concertina wire in Arizona and California. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And we have a caller waiting on the line, Mark in Montana. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Howdy, Michael. I wanted to talk about the immigration issue. I live in Montana, but I work in West Texas in the oil field. So every week or so, I pack my gear and I come out here and spend my time 20 hours a day getting oil out of the ground. And I'll tell you what, if anybody out there really thinks this border is safe and secure, made this offer to many people before, and nobody's taken me up on it. You fly into Midland, Odessa, Texas. I'll pick you up in my luxury pickup. I will take you down to the border. You can get out, and you can mingle with those peaceful migrants. And I promise you that I will not use my firearm to prevent those peaceful immigrants from doing anything bad to you. So if you think it's so good, come on down. Take me up on the challenge. It's not. It's a terrible place. That border's terrible. We were working down like out of Del Rio, I guess. And we were told, the Border Patrol told us that take your guns with you, man. And they had escorts for us because they were afraid that they were having banditos. There's still a lot of that going on, believe it or not.
Yes.
They were coming over the border. They were stealing the equipment and the trucks. And once they hit that Mexican border, they were safe. You know, and the border's wide open. You can just drive across in a lot of places. A lot of the food trucks out here, they're from Mexico. They just come over, bring their food, sell it, and go back home. It's wide open, and you don't know what's coming in. It's terrible. It's terrible, man. People out here, the oil field workers, are all pretty decent folks. But it's the other stuff that goes on. And, you know, a while back, hell, they had Mexican helicopters made an incursion into the United States. They were, I don't know, X amount of kilometers over the border, and State Department didn't do anything about it. They've had hunters down there. The banditos will come over and steal the hunters' guns and vehicles. It's not safe. And the human trafficking going that way, and the stuff coming this way. At one time, they were smuggling the refrigerant, the R13, for the older cars. That was a big smuggling item. They'll smuggle anything that they can make a buck on.
Yes.
So it's not safe. Don't be delusional about it, anybody out there. If not, get a hold of Michael. I'll leave some contact information, and we'll make arrangements for you to hook up down here, and I'll take you to the border.
Okay, send videotape.
No, I don't go near the border, buddy.
Oh, okay.
I'm not stupid. I stay the hell away. If I were to take somebody down there, I'd keep my distance. So it's not safe. They'll steal your stuff. They'll take you at gunpoint, steal your vehicle. They'll try to hold you hostage. I'm not worth anything. I got no family members, but it's not safe. There's plenty of video on YouTube. I got a buddy of mine that lives down in Aiea, and he films it quite a bit and puts it online. You can look on YouTube. Just do illegal caravan, illegal aliens, anything like that on YouTube. You'll find hundreds of videos.
Yeah, it's an ugly situation, and they're bringing all kinds of drugs into this country. They're bringing all kinds of contagious diseases into this country. There appears to be a lot of trafficking of underage children for nefarious purposes going on. It's a major criminal enterprise. And the Democrats are apparently okay with all of this stuff as long as they can build up the population of illegal immigrants as a voting bloc.
Right. And I'll tell you something. A few years ago, I went down to Houston. I like doing flea markets, and looking at all the gadgets and gizmos and stuff. And there was a person selling Social Security cards. And you could get a license, and it was a good copy of a Texas license with your own picture on it. So don't tell me there's not you don't need fake IDs and fake Social Security cards if you're not up to, if you're up to no good. That's why you need that stuff. And that's what's going on. And those flea markets down there, those little out of the way flea markets, you'd be surprised what you can buy off the street. It's terrible.
Well, I imagine it's probably a lot more interesting than the flea market we used to have at the bottom of the hill. I think the most interesting thing I ever found there was this antique medical electric therapy machine, which I bought as an office decoration for a relative of ours who's a medical doctor. And, definite quackery, but that was about it. And I did find a Tesla coil there.
I want some of them little coconut bras. I want one of them coconut bras for my girlfriend. I think that'd be kind of cool.
We got lots of those around here. Cool. We got lots of those around here.
What do they call those? What are the names of those things?
Coconut bra.
Okay. Awesome. All right, Michael, I'll let you go on to the next caller. Thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it. You have an awesome day.
All right, thanks for the information. We're going to switch over to Keith Rogers. And aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon there. Yeah, good afternoon there, Mike. You know what? I've been following this whole thing here for quite a while, and you can probably tell that through my emails and stuff that we exchange back and forth. But, the immigration is no worse than watching the DHS cut deals with the Sonora drug cartel to allow a certain amount of drugs in this country. The DHS Century Members Program, which only has, or I should call it a program, that only has a 10-second wait at the border with special speed pass lanes down in San Diego and such, in which if you Google or whatever search engine you want, Century member arrested, you'll see millions of dollars in meth, cocaine, and other drugs coming in this country. And then we have NATO that moves its operations centers to Colombia, for this new ramp up on Venezuela. This is to get people moving. And then, of course, you have the Israeli arms sales to Honduras, to Latin America, Rwanda, Myanmar. This is a massive scale of immigration, and it's not immigration, it's war refugees. And I had a ham friend of mine say, why in the hell they want to come here? And I says, it's the only place not being bombed or the government's being overthrown yet. But this is on Twitter all day long, it's white genocide. This is a destruction of this country.
Yep.
And that's it, and they, just like these democratically held cities, which are rat cities, tent cities, millions of homeless starving, once these voters are used, they'll be kicked to the curb to join the rest of the millions of Americans that are sleeping on the streets. And,
it's a mess. There's no two ways about it. I mean, the long-term future of this country from all of this massive illegal immigration is basically the entire nation's going to turn into a ghetto. There's going to be, the wealthy areas where the elite live, and all of our cities and everything else. As you say, everybody's going to be sleeping in the streets and struggling just to get by. And that's certainly...
Mike, that reminds me also, like up in Ukraine, where the Israelis proudly pronounce that they're arming the neo-Nazis. So who would have thought Jews would have been arming Nazis? But of course, this again is for a stated goal to cause a rise in anti-Semitism to get Russian Jews to move to Israel.
Yes. Israel's pulled this along. Israel is actually out there attacking Jews in order to try and scare them into going to Israel. They tried that with the Iranian Jews. That didn't work out very well. They succeeded in doing it with the Ethiopian Jews, and then they decided they didn't want them, and now they're trying to get them to go back home again. And
same in Europe there, Mike. Oh, sorry, Mike, but the same in Europe there, where it's always a targeted thing, kosher deli, a synagogue, and then your rabbis get out there. Anyone can Google this. Rabbis call for Jews to move to Israel because Europe is too dangerous. This is a mass. It's a twofold immigration. Jews to Israel, where they have border security walls that Americans built, of course, and then, of course, everyone else gets a shaft.
Yes.
So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there because I kind of watch trends. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to immigration, tomorrow is a major, major vote on Brexit in the Parliament, which Theresa May is expected to lose by quite a wide margin. And the speculation now is that she may face a no-confidence vote immediately after that. She could literally be removed from office this week because of the failure of the Brexit deal. And again, Theresa May never made secret the fact that she was a Remainer. Her Chequers plan was just a complete giveaway to the EU, and the British are very unhappy with her. Parliament's very unhappy with her, and so it looks like it's coming to an end. There's going to be a no-deal Brexit, barring the unexpected. Apparently, it looks like Theresa May's Brexit deal faces a record Commons drubbing by a majority of 228. The polls have definitely gone against her. And she's on course for a major defeat tomorrow. So we'll see what happens after that. Meanwhile, all across Europe, their dreams of integration are starting to slip away. The European people are basically waking up from this horrible nightmare called the EU. And you've got the Yellow Vest protest in France and other European countries. And now, of course, you have the news that Presidents Trump and Macron will not attend the World Economic Forum at Davos. So it's definitely starting to fall apart over there. Trump's not attending because it's clear he's no longer a member of the Davos crowd. Macron isn't because any public appearance by him will double the number of people donning high visibility safety gear and taking to the streets. So we seem to have reached peak Davos, so to speak. And again, it looks like the EU is going to start falling apart. We're hearing about Germany wants out now. Italy wants out. It was a bad idea, badly implemented. They had that European Central Bank plundering all of the nations, driving them all into poverty. The worst example, of course, is the way Greece was treated, where Greece's government basically created a huge amount of the debt in a fraud to hide the scale of the debt to join the EU. And the EU's attitude, or the ECB's attitude, was debt is debt is debt. And we don't care if your government basically defrauded you and increased the debt. You, the people, still have to pay it. And that is definitely not working out very well at all. Viktor Orban is out there basically saying Hungary's goal is to have anti-immigration forces in the majority of every European Union institution. And he says that Hungary can be proud it was the first country to prove migration can be stopped. And Hungary wants to see an anti-immigration majority first in the European Parliament, then the European Commission, and eventually through member states' national elections in the European Council as well. So Orban is definitely pushing back on this idea of open borders and globalism. Now, not too long ago, Starbucks went through this ugly situation where they refused to allow non-customers to use their restroom. And everybody came on in, the social justice warriors came on in and said, oh, terrible, terrible Starbucks, how could you be so heartless? So Starbucks said, yes, non-customers can use our restrooms. But apparently this has led to a problem where paying customers and employees are going into the bathrooms and they're basically finding discarded hypodermic needles all over the place. Apparently, druggies are going into these bathrooms to shoot up and leaving the needles behind. So Starbucks is having to install hypodermic needle disposal boxes in the bathrooms for the safety of the workers, because you don't want to try and pick one of those up. You don't want to accidentally step on one. Who knows what disease or illness you're going to pick up. As you have probably heard by now, Governor Ron DeSantis suspended Broward's Sheriff Scott Israel last Friday. And is replacing him with a former Coral Springs police sergeant with a background in active shooter training. Apparently this is fallout from Scott Israel's failure to take action during the Parkland school shooting. Now, Scott Israel is out there saying that this is all the fault of the NRA, that the NRA has targeted him and they are behind the move to get rid of him. So whatever you can do for a blame there. Now there's this scientist, James Watson, and he's one of the people who discovered the stranded double helix of DNA. Prior to that, scientists thought that proteins carried our heredity, that there was something in the proteins of our cells that led to reproduction. But James Watson was one of the scientists who discovered DNA and how it worked. And apparently he has had several of his honors stripped from him for coming out with a statement saying that IQ is linked to DNA, and that unfortunately some races just do have higher DNA than others. And of course the social justice warriors are out there saying, how can you say that? How can you say? Well, he's a scientist. He's reporting on the data. But he's been denounced as a racist now. And, he won the Nobel Prize in Physiology for being the co-discoverer of DNA. But in a recent PBS film, American Masters Decoding Watson, Watson said that DNA causes an intelligence difference between different races. And that apparently is now a forbidden topic to say. Science is trumped by politics once again. All right, let's talk about the transgender movement, if you will. Over at the College Fix, they have an article about how parents are reacting in shock as their daughters come home from college with mustaches and their breasts removed. And they're basically looking at college officials who are telling students gender is a choice. They're having students put their preferred pronouns on name tags and emails. Gender fluidity is being normalized. And students who do a transition are being celebrated as cultural heroes. They're brave warriors. And apparently colleges are providing the medical tools necessary for students to transition. A recent column in the Wall Street Journal reports that health plans at 86 colleges, including those of nearly every Ivy League school, cover not only cross-sex hormones, but outright surgery. And the piece basically talked about a phenomenon of rapid onset gender dysphoria, described as overwhelmingly affecting girls who then receive the full support of the educational and medical community. So apparently there's this mother, Catherine Cave, who's out there trying to start a movement saying, basically, we're losing our kids at college to the transgender craze. It's not a choice. They're being encouraged. This is a more extreme version of what we saw back during the feminist movement of the 1990s, where women were being told not that they had a right to enter the workplace, but they had an obligation. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we've got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We got some callers waiting on the line. Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. By the way, that piece of bumper music is probably one of my favorites that you have. You were talking earlier about how DNA affects IQ.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm sorry if people don't like to hear that, but it's a fact.
Yes.
And Jordan Peterson, who is a clinical psychologist, even came out and said this very same thing. We kind of had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, kind of briefly, had to do with Judaism and the Jewish people and their IQ, or at least the ones that, you know, that are out there in prominent job titles. Their IQ's higher. You said the Chinese have a higher IQ.
Yep.
Hey, you know what? Suck it up. That's the way it is. I'm sorry, you liberals. If you don't like it, you cannot socially engineer someone into being smarter. It just doesn't happen that way. Sorry. Also, another thing about the Chinese, I have to wonder at some point, and it's probably happening right now, if their IQ is going to start dropping due to environmental causes such as, you know, pollution, the types of foods. Maybe they're going to get into GMO foods and you know, that sort of thing. You know, radiation and,
yes,
you know, all that sort of jazz, right? It's got to affect the DNA of people, I would tend to think anyway. And, you know, basically that's all I had to say. I mean, that guy that said that DNA is linked to IQ, he is absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. Just, you know, like women are more into social sciences and men are into...
It's people who are born beautiful versus people who are born ugly. It's controlled by the DNA. And what are the social justice warriors going to do? Try and say that, well, you know, you have to stop looking at the beautiful people and start looking at the ugly people because they're feeling disadvantaged. I'm sorry. You know, all people are created equal is great politics, but it's bad science.
Yeah. I mean, as far as rights and freedom and liberty and all that, you know, yeah, we are and should be equal. But I mean, it's nobody's fault that someone looks better than somebody else. I mean, that's just the way it is. I
Yes.
mean, what are we supposed to do? Now we're going to genetically engineer people in the womb to be beautiful? I mean, it's not going to end well. Doing silly stuff like this, it will not end well. And all these children, like you said, they're being indoctrinated into thinking that there's something that they're not.
Yes.
And it's sad. It's very sad.
It's tragic.
And we have mental health doctors for a reason, and they should be utilized a lot more than what they are right now.
Well, I'm not sure the mental health doctors are doing all that positive a job here, because you've got that diagnostic manual that's declaring everything is a mental illness. Wanting to eat healthy food is a mental illness. Now they're saying masculinity is a mental illness. You know, psychiatry is not a science. It's basically a lot of opinions by people who are basically guessing. There's no machine you can hook somebody up to that says this person is a sociopath, or this person is manic depressive, or this person is whatever. It's just always somebody's subjective opinion, and that somebody is usually there trying to peddle some kind of medication. So I'm not sure that that's the answer. But definitely, you're right. These college students are being indoctrinated. They're being encouraged and socially rewarded for going through this gender transition. And a lot of people who go through that transition, they have regrets afterwards because it didn't really solve the problems in their lives. And YouTube apparently has started censoring, taking down those videos where these transgendered people who went through the surgery and everything will get on up there and say, this was a mistake and I wish I could undo it and take it back. And YouTube is basically taking that all down. They want you to think this transgender thing is absolutely wonderful. And I got a news flash for you. Bruce Jenner is a guy. Doesn't matter how much hormones or surgery he's had, he is a guy. That too is determined by your DNA.
That's right. There's nothing that could change that. You're born a man,
yep,
or you're born a woman.
Yep.
And, I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. So deal with it. If you can't deal with it, then, obviously, like I said, and maybe you should start looking at some mental health problems, or mental health doctors. And like you said, I mean, everything's, a big problem now. But, man, Mike, we are in a world of hurt. It's not even funny anymore.
We absolutely are. And, I look at this whole transgender thing. I'm not sure what the agenda behind it is, but I do see it as a symptom of our coming societal collapse, that we're into this sort of bizarre behavior. It almost reminds me of Rome under Caligula.
Yeah, just more divide and conquer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Break us up into smaller and smaller
We're going to create a whole new group of oppressed people. Anyway, Al, got to let you go.
Thanks,
got
Mike.
to take another break for commercials. Got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We've got callers waiting on the line. We're going to start with Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, got done watching. It's a 2-series TV show. It's called Sense, like your sense of smell, sense of sight, hearing. Sense 8, the number 8, not spelled out, number 8. This is 2 series, so 2 years. You can't watch an episode of this without seeing a bunch of debauchery. And we're talking everything from homosexual, all out, right there in the open, leaving nothing to the imagination, sex, full-fledged bone-on, 12 people orgies. Not hiding anything, just absolute debauchery. But on the transgender thing, they're doing a really good job in the media, because you have this show right here, which shows not only a gay couple with a live-in girlfriend, if you will, but you also have now this is, in real life, this is born a boy, got a sex change into a girl, and is now an actress, if you will, in Hollywood. Plays the part of someone who was born a boy named Michael, got a sex change late in teenage years, early in her 20s, whatever it was, to become a girl, just to become a lesbian who marries another lesbian. Now, this is the kind of debauchery that we see in our entertainment media. So it's not just the colleges, it is everywhere. You cannot get away from this. And for you Christians out there who believe in the invisible man upstairs, all right, if you think God had fun with Sodom and Gomorrah, you ain't seen nothing compared to what's coming down the pike for this country if we don't put an end to this kind of sick, disgusting, warped. I don't know how there are many adjectives I can use to describe the level of disgusting.
Art, change the channel. Okay, now where I think things have gone wrong, when those who are gay were agitating for acceptance, and I said, yeah, that's a good thing, live and let live. Okay, but with this transgender situation, it is being sold and it is being marketed, and I'm trying to figure out why. What is behind it? Is it just this crazy fad that's caught on? But again, you're having the colleges, they're actually providing the medical services for people to go through this surgery. And this whole gender fluidity situation, maybe it's part of the plan of making us doubt who we really are, or making us unsure of who we really are, which is something the globalists want. They want to destroy our sense of self, our sense of identity, our regional history, our cultural history, and basically just turn us into these drones who will be receptive to being controlled by the global government. How transgenderism fits into this, I'm not entirely sure, but it definitely, it's definitely a bad thing when they're working to convince children to go through this. And I'm not talking about college-age kids. This is already down into the grade schools where they're pushing this agenda.
The reason I brought this up was I watched the entire series because the storyline and the plot is really good if you get rid of all of that debauchery. I was watching for the storyline because I wanted to see how this was going to play out. It's a beautiful, beautiful storyline if you get rid of the debauchery. The reason I brought it up was because it plays into what you were talking about with the people going off to college and coming back with whatever. It plays into the same conversation. But I also know that a lot of parents out there have Netflix accounts and the children watch Netflix unsupervised.
Yes.
So this is on Netflix. You need to be, and that's the reason I brought it up, was so the parents can monitor what their children are watching.
Well, I think most of the TVs and the cable boxes, now have built-in parental controls where, there's a signal in the VITSI at the top of the video field that carries a rating. How many of our children have little iPads they carry around everywhere they can watch this stuff? It's not just TVs and computers, Mike. You know this. The technology, people, whatever in school, and watch this stuff. This is what I'm talking about. So just trying to help people be aware. Anyway, thanks, man. Have a great one. All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Mike. I wanted to bring the attention, I don't know if you've seen it or not, to your attention. Laura Loomer pulled a great stunt today,
yes,
bringing
she did.
A couple illegal aliens to Nancy Pelosi's house. I think she hired a few of them, and they made a tent, and we're showing the hypocrisy of, and I forget their little rant, and I know it ends with no USA at all, but shows that, no borders. But here's Nancy Pelosi, her house, big walls, doors. I even think they went up to the door and tried to get into their door. And I believe a couple of the illegal immigrants had got arrested, which proves my point that the illegal immigration, it's a slavery thing. It's an underclass. These people can disappear. The Democrats can disappear, the illegal immigrants whenever they want because they're undocumented and everything. But it just goes to show it's more of along the lines of not only voting, but a populace or a population of people that they can do whatever they want with because there's no documentation. And on to the transgender thing, I had said it to you before. The Tavistock Institute had brought out a study about with sterilizing transgender children, and I think how this plays into the picture too. I think it's part of population control.
I'm not really sure about that. I think that it's not population control. I mean, there would be other ways of taking care of the population control. I don't think this is it. This is basically just flooding this country with illegal immigrants who can be counted on voting Democratic. And so they don't want them to go away. They don't want them to be disappeared.
Okay. But I just wanted to bring the whole thing with Laura Loomer. She did a great thing today. And I mean, it's just highly impressed of her, what she can pull. I mean, I've been hoping somebody would pull a political stunt like that, and she did it, and my hat goes off to her.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Absolutely agree. And I mean, did Pelosi have the tent and everything removed, or are they still camped out on her front lawn?
From what I'm understanding, she's down in your neck of the woods in Hawaii doing a retreat or a vacation while the government shut down. But she did have her manager of that place she's at, I guess, of her house, and
Yes.
they did make her make them take the tent, go away, and they said that they were going to arrest one or a few of the illegal aliens, and not Laura Loomer and her crew, but the illegal aliens themselves.
Okay, you're right. Laura Loomer did a good one. It showed the rank hypocrisy.
Absolutely. Well, you have a great day, sir.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And by the way, Pelosi was here for a vacation, but I think she's back in Washington, D.C. right now, stirring up trouble as the Speaker of the House. All right, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And I was saying before that the transgender mania seems to be a sign of societal collapse, and I'm not the only person who's saying that. Camille Paglia, who is a feminist, is out there saying exactly the same thing. Our culture is collapsing, and this whole transgender mania is a symptom of it. Now, here's something that the liberals are not going to like. Apparently, Will Witt of PragerU took a recent trip to a Navajo reservation in Window Rock, Arizona, and actually asked the Native Americans what they think about cultural appropriation and what is and isn't offensive to Native Americans. And basically, the Native Americans said they didn't have a problem with sport teams using names like the Redskins or people dressing up as Native Americans for Halloween. They didn't have a problem with it at all. They're not offended by it. So it's another example of how the liberals are creating offense where none really exists. The only place where the Native Americans said they might have an issue is somebody who is copying some of their religious garb and doing it poorly. But other than that, no, they don't have a problem with it. They don't have a problem with people wearing, Indian trinkets. They don't find it offensive at all. Okay. Over in Huntsville, Alabama, there was a fight that broke out. A man left the club, attempted to come back in with an AK-47. The security officer for the club, goes by the name of LaToya, intervened immediately. She got all the people basically a safe distance back. She then shot the suspect once in the leg to put him on the ground. Got the gun away from him, administered first aid, and got him to the hospital, at which point the police stepped on in. So where is the mainstream media coverage of this? Have you ever noticed that? When there is a shooter who succeeds in shooting up a bar or something, headline news all over. But when a mass shooting is stopped and prevented by armed security or armed police or just by a law-abiding citizen with a concealed carry license, you never hear about it. They don't want you to know that guns actually can be used to save lives. They're still pushing guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. Down in Galveston County, Texas, there's a former judge, Christopher Dupuy, and apparently he got sent to jail for 6 years because he was out there faking sex for hire ads for women he had dated. Apparently he would date the women, they would dump him. This was his idea of revenge. He used the pseudonym Don Tequila, and he would post their photos and phone numbers and say sex for hire. So these women were getting all these harassing phone calls wanting to hire them. This is a judge who did this. All right, getting into medicine and science here. Apparently, among the many other things that are being put into vaccines as adjuvants is monosodium glutamate. And it's actually toxic. It's an excitotoxin. the same as aspartame. But because it's useful in the kitchen and useful in processed foods to make you want to eat more and buy more, there's basically kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But apparently it is being added to vaccines, and it is an excitotoxin. And that actually makes a lot of sense because for myself personally, MSG is a migraine trigger, which means it's kicking off those brain cells into hyperactivity. Apparently, there's been a study that finds that nearly 1/3 of older patients who are, prescribed opiate pain medications for non-surgical conditions suffer harmful outcomes. In other words, at the very least, they become addicted. That's the reason for all this overprescription of opioids. They have a cheap source of opium, Afghanistan, and they're out there pushing these pills. There was that pharmaceutical executive got sent to jail for running a program to incentivize doctors to write prescriptions for these opioids to get the patients addicted. It's kind of hard to see the line between Big Pharma and that street dealer down on the corner. Now, Big Pharma has another issue they need to deal with. Apparently, a recent survey published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs is showing that most medical pot users have discontinued their use of prescription drugs. And that's because they're discovering how cannabis can provide a safe alternative to the dangerous effects of prescription pills. And that's why Big Pharma is on the warpath against cannabis. It's cutting into their profits. They don't want you treating yourself with something that you can buy at the state store or possibly grow in your own backyard. The goal is to keep you dependent on their medications. All right, last Thursday, I mentioned this in the closing, and I didn't get back to it on Friday here. The current Windows 7 patch, do not install it. Apparently, in the January security update, it's bricking Windows 7 devices with an errant, not genuine Windows license error. And there's a bug that blocks administrator access to remote shares on Windows Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7. This is the monthly roll-up update KB44809070 and the security-only update KB44809060 for Windows 7 Service Pack 1 and Windows Server 2008 R2 Service Pack 1. And this is not the first time this has happened, where Microsoft will put out these patch updates and they're not fully tested and they cause all kinds of problems. So this roll-up, this monthly roll-up was supposed to address a serious PowerShell flaw and add extra mitigations for Meltdown Inspector side channel attacks. But it's basically breaking the networking, and on a lot of machines, it's basically declaring that your operating system is not legal, that it's an illegal copy, and of course it won't run. My goodness here. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials coming up on the top of the hour in Frosty Wooldridge, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about computers here. And as you know, Kaspersky Labs, which is a Russian company, and they produce very good antivirus, anti-malware software, they have been sort of banned from U.S. government computers over concerns they may be spying on the United States. But back in 2016, it was Kaspersky Labs who uncovered the single largest theft of U.S. intelligence in history. And Kaspersky basically spotted this. It began with strange messages on Twitter in August of 2016. that seem to connect to this huge theft of sophisticated U.S. National Security Agency hacking tools. Remember when that all came on out? And Kaspersky investigated, discovered the identity of the sender. They reported their findings to the NSA. And a subsequent search of the suspect's home uncovered 2 decades worth of stolen data amounting to 50 terabytes worth of classified material from NSA and other government offices. Seems to me like Kaspersky are the good guys. Okay, now then. As you know, we just got done with the Consumer Electronics Show, and there's a lot of whiz-bang gadgets and gizmos out there to look at. Apparently, this was the year of the bendable cell phone. And apparently, there were a couple of players out there where they have these phones that will literally bend. You can fold them up and put them in your pocket. But apparently, according to this article over in Gizmodo, they really weren't all that impressive. They're very thick. There's always a bump or ripple where it bends. And apparently it's a struggle to open and close these things. So it looked like it was a good idea when it was proposed, but the execution is not really that good. Now, there may be a new source of power out there on the horizon. And apparently they're starting to look at these bacteria that are living deep in mines at the bottom of lakes, and they produce electricity in order to survive in environments that are low in oxygen. And apparently they're starting to run experiments on these bacteria to one day basically produce batteries that they'll be filled with these bacteria generating electricity until their food supply runs out. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Now, the other interesting thing right now, as you know, Earth's magnetic North Pole doesn't line up with the geographic North Pole. It tends to wander around a lot, and sometimes it goes slow, sometimes it goes very fast. If you're working with a precision compass, you're probably having to do an offset between magnetic north and geographic north. But right now, the North Pole, the magnetic pole, is moving towards Siberia at a very fast rate. Fast enough where those people who are in charge of global navigation are having to update their databases. And this affects everything from Google Maps to GPS. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We're going to be back with Frosty Wooldridge after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And joining us now is Frosty Wooldridge. And Frosty, thank you for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you, Michael. And, I want to just give a shout out to your audience because we're all Americans. We're all in this together, black, white, brown, red, yellow, you name it. Of course, I was stationed in the United States Army at Brooke Army at San Antonio back in the 70s as a fresh second lieutenant. Also, I know intimately all of Texas. I've traveled to every corner, and having lived there and also thrived there, amazingly, you probably won't have anybody else that's bicycled across Texas 3 times now on my coast-to-coast bicycle rides across the southern tier, and it took 8 times each time. And I got to tell you, the people of Texas, kind, generous,
yes,
loving, and all of the good things that makes up America. I've experienced them in Texas, so it's really a pleasure.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll get into the issue that I wanted to talk to you about.
All righty. I graduated from Michigan State University, and of course, went through the ROTC program with the United States Army. I graduated, then I went on for a postgraduate degree. Also served in the Army there, also in Fort Riley, Kansas, and Fort Benning, Georgia. I became a math and science teacher in Denver, Colorado back in the early 70s. And one of the things that I did was I didn't have much money, but I always had a bicycle. And so in the last 40 47 years now, I have bicycled across 6 continents and almost 100 countries. I've written 14 books. My 15th one is coming out. It's a trilogy on the overpopulation crisis facing America. And because of my travels, in 1984, I traveled into Hong Kong all the way to Beijing, Delhi, Bangladesh, Dhaka, you name it. And I, as a young kid, I was a happy-go-lucky teacher, and I had time to go and see these places. But once I got there, my worldview changed dramatically because I saw people stacked on each other. I saw the Yangtze River, which I've floated on, the Ganges, which I've floated on, polluted beyond all understanding. And I said, oh my gosh, the human race has got a big problem, and it starts here in China and India and Bangladesh, Indochina, certainly in Mexico, certainly all the overpopulated places of the world. And so since then, I've written Immigration's Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences 15 years ago. The next one was America on the Brink, the next added 100 million Americans. And my forthcoming book in April is America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations. And it's my goal or my intention with each audience that gets this message is to let you understand where we're headed, because the United States right now, when I was back in college, was only 194 million people. Then we opened up the floodgates in 1965 with the Immigration Reform Act, and we added 100 million people from all over the world. And that turned us into a 300 million in 2006. And right now we're 330 million and headed for 440 million people within the next 31 years. And what I'd like to see is that every person that listens to this broadcast becomes an activist to change the course of history. And my goal is to change the immigration into this country down to a trickle so that we might survive as a viable civilization and a sustainable one. I also like to create a national and international conference of world leaders, religious leaders, environmental leaders to talk about where the human race is going in the 21st century, because right now it's going over a demographic cliff, and we need to move forward with the brightest minds and the brightest thinkers and the brightest activists to change course toward a thriving and sustainable future in Texas, in Michigan, and Maine, and California, and even here in Colorado, rather than the one we're going toward, and that's, again, a demographic cliff. And it all happened because I've stood on the South Pole, I've stood on the Wall of China, I've scuba dived all the oceans of the world, I've watched the plastic buildup, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch I've seen personally. So you can imagine, I care about the future. I also care about every person's children. We all have children. They're going to inherit what we bequeath them. And I'd like to bequeath our children a viable and sustainable civilization. So there you have it in a nutshell.
Okay, well, the reason I wanted to bring you on the show today is, as you know, immigration, especially illegal immigration, is a hot button topic. Trump is still trying to get his wall built. People are starting to look back at the 2006 Secure Our Border bill, which was supposed to build 300 miles of fence. 700 miles of fence, built only 33 miles, and everybody's wondering what happened to that, where did the money go? So obviously there is an economic cost to illegal immigration, there is a societal cost, a cultural cost, and what do you see as being the most significant impact on our country from all this illegal immigration?
Well, I as a teacher and as an educator, I can share this with you. Right now, we're having a sociological impact of mass immigration and illegal immigration coming into our country. According to numbersusa.org, we're paying out around $296 billion a year across 15 federal agencies year after year after year. One of the big ticket items on that is the anchor babies or jackpot babies, and that's an average of 300,000 illegal pregnant women come across the borders illegally every year and or on visas, and they birth their child, and you and I, the American taxpayer, pay out billions and billions of dollars to K through 12 we pay for medical, we pay for clothing, we pay for food stamps, breakfasts and lunches, you name it. We're paying for that. And so I would like to make sure at some point that the 14th Amendment and the misinterpretation of it stops giving these illegal alien pregnant mothers instant citizenship to their children. And I also absolutely want to make sure that we stop paying for all of this. And so we need to have the senators and Congress get together and amend the 14th Amendment to stop anchor babies and make sure that anyone who births a child that wants to be an American citizen is an American woman in the first place, and not somebody coming across the borders illegally. And then we need to really start enforcing Section 8 of U.S. Code 1324.
Yes.
It is in violation of federal law to hire, to transport, and to house an illegal alien. And it's up to $2,000 per illegal and up to 5 years in prison. We need to do that in order to stop the draw of illegal aliens coming into this country. That would then release those jobs to American citizens and give them a job plus a job at a living wage. That means that these big Marriott hotels and the big construction firms would not be able to continue paying subpar wages, and actually those jobs would be taken over by American citizens. Now, the third aspect of illegal immigration, you're talking about people don't talk about these things, but poor people are every year are shoplifting $52 billion worth of goods out of our mercantile stores. And many of them are gangs of illegals who are literally stealing the American public blind by, because we got to pay for that $52 billion. Work it out. It comes at $25-30 million a year in mercantile goods. Now, the fourth part, of course, is the crime of driving a car without a license, driving a car without insurance, and undermining the economy of the United States by underground economies. And in fact, these illegals are sending back around $120 billion a year annually back to their home countries, which is bleeding our country. And then the fifth thing that I would like to bring up, Michael, is the fact that I just did a story on it. And for those of you who have read me, newswithviews.com, Capitol Hill Outsider, I write for 15 different news service websites as a journalist, a ground level journalist. We are paying $70 billion a year in drugs coming across the border: heroin, methamphetamine, of course, cocaine, and quite a few other toxic drugs. And you all know these opioids that are coming across have killed something in excess of 100,000 Americans here in the last 4 or 5 years. So we need to take definite action and really create some prohibitive or consequential laws that we enforce in order to stop this onslaught of our country. And of course, if any of you know, on the sixth point here, we are taking in, according to Dr. Stephen Camarada at CIS.org, Center for Immigration Studies, and he's a brilliant man, we're averaging around 500,000 illegal aliens each year. And once they come across our borders, they start melting in. And the new Yale research study of last October, 2018, gave new figures. You always hear 11 million illegals. Yale came out with a much more accurate figure, and it was 22 to 25 million illegal aliens that are now residing in our country. And even Ann Coulter, the great journalist there in New York and Washington, D.C., came out with a book, Adios America, The Left's Turning America into a Third World Hellhole. She published around 25 to 30 million. And in my book, America on the Brink, the next added 100 million Americans, I had researched 20 million. So it looks like I'm the most conservative of all the researchers. But what it means is we're paying a severe bill for all this illegal immigration. It's changing our schools and degrading them. I'll give you an example. The flunk out dropout rate for Denver public schools, because we have 173 different languages in the Denver public schools, is between 55 and 67%. We have in California, where illegal immigration has taken over many, many cities, and certainly much of Southern California, there's no discipline, there's no education going on. They're just warehousing these kids, and there's no propensity for any kind of intellectual pursuit. And our kids are paying a severe price. And so now you're noticing that there's different languages that are becoming dominant languages. Spanish is becoming a dominant language in classrooms and writing. And you go to places like Houston, there's probably 5 TV stations that are all in Spanish. You have dozens of radio shows that are all in Spanish. So what's happening, Michael, is that we're having not only the underground economies, but we're also having parallel societies that are proliferating in our own country. If you go to Detroit, Michigan, it's all very Arabic, and you don't see the American flag flying. It's all Arabic, and the schools are being taught in Arabic. Same thing in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we have to ask ourselves, as a country, as a civilization, as a culture, do we want to maintain our culture and our language to have a cohesive society, or do we want to be a fragmented and fractured country where there is no cohesion and that everybody is kind of at odds with each other because there's so many cultures that are incompatible and simply not working for the United States of America, so much so that we could become the disunited or the divided states of America, and that does not portend a very good future for our children.
No, it really doesn't. And I'm in mind of what Teddy Roosevelt said about immigration. And I'm paraphrasing loosely here, but he said basically, if you want to come to the United States, that's fine. But just understand, we have one country, the United States. We have one language, that's English. We have one flag, that's the U.S. flag. And basically, he was saying that if you come here, you are expected to basically assimilate to our society, to adjust to our society. What you do in the privacy of your own home is your own business, but when you're interacting with the American culture, you have to remember we have certain laws and certain expectations. This idea about having all of these schools teaching classes in all these different languages, it looks to me like that's a real problem. They should be teaching these students English, because that is the language of this country. And if we're going to get together and have any kind of a dialogue or discussion, we all need to be speaking the same language. But if you have these people over here are continuing to speak Spanish, and these people are speaking Arabic, these people are speaking Samoan, then you're right. Our society is becoming fractured.
That's correct, Michael. I'd like to share this quote with you, because I think it's very important for every person listening. And again, this is about every American, black, white, brown, red, or yellow. We're all in this together. And I want that to be very clear. I want our country to survive. I want it to thrive. And the only way it can thrive is that we have a cohesive single language. Language is what creates identity. Language creates the cohesiveness of being on the same page when you're having an intellectual dialectic, if you're having a compromise. You know, some languages don't have the term compromise. In fact, I think Spanish does not have the word for compromise. Arabic doesn't have a word for compromise. And that's what really created the U.S. Constitution. Ben Franklin and George Washington and John Adams and James Madison and all of them, Thomas Jefferson, had to compromise. And that created this extraordinary U.S. Constitution, which is one of the greatest documents in all of history, because it created this extraordinary land. And even when there was slavery, the amendments gave us the ability to change that so that every person of every color has the ability to express themselves and succeed. But the path we're taking right now, here's what's happening. Any culture that will not defend itself against displacement through mass immigration faces extinction. That includes both time-tested and successful cultures. Embracing diversity results in cultural suicide. America's multicultural path guarantees its destruction via cultural clashes and conflict with Islam, Mexican, and African cultures that diametrically oppose American culture. The more diverse a country, the more destructive and broken down its future. The more people, the more it destroys its quality of life and standard of living. The more it adds immigrants, the more destruction to its environment. The more it imports refugees, the faster America, Canada, Europe, and Australia lose their own ability to function, and worse, lose their identities. Exponential growth of any civilization leads to ultimate collapse. You see it right now in Africa and in India and China today. You will see it in Europe, Canada, Australia, and America in the coming years if these Western countries don't stop all forms of immigration, unquote. I'd like you to breathe that in, because that's a very powerful quote, and we're facing it, all of us, and we have to ask ourselves, do we want this kind of a future for our children? And of course, I've been to, like I say, I've traveled across 6 continents. I've seen cultures clash. I've seen linguistic immigration crises and clashing. I've seen it gets to be such a stalemate that nobody understands what to do or how to compromise, and nothing gets done. And then you see the schools are not operating. And the one thing, Michael, that I've learned in third world countries is, why do they stay third world countries? Why are they in such misery? The key word is illiteracy. Illiteracy is what drives that. And if we don't maintain our standards in our country, and we don't maintain educational standards, we will not have citizens who are cohesive and linguistic as far as English, and then they won't be able to critically think and then solve problems and move us forward. And that's what illegal immigration is doing to our country, and certainly along with legal immigration. And we really have to do something to change course if we want to survive the 21st century.
Okay, now I do want to draw a line here between illegal immigration and legal immigration. And
Sure.
Legal immigration basically are people who come here, they play by the rules, they have skills that will make life better in the United States of America. The problem with the illegal immigrants is they're stepping across the border without permission. They're coming on in, they're a strain on the economy. There's strain on the schools. There's strain on the health care system, which is already overstressed. And again, there's a lot of crime is involved, and they're bringing in contagious diseases. Anyway, listen,
Correct.
Frosty, we got to take a break for commercials here. So we're going to sell some product, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Frosty Wooldridge. And Frosty, before we go any further, I just got an email asking, do you have a website?
Oh, thank you, Michael. Yes, I do have a website, but it's a fun website, and it's www.howtolivealifeofadventure.com. And I'm glad you asked that, because that website also takes you to my Facebook page, and it takes you to, in fact, my latest book just came out last week. It's Old Men Bicycling Across America, A Journey Beyond Old Age. And I'm 72 years old, and yet I get to play like a kid and bicycle 4,500 miles across the northern tier from Astoria, Oregon to Bar Harbor, Maine just last summer, because I'm healthy and I eat very healthfully. I exercise very healthy. I call it body, mind, and spirit. And so that website is the one that really inspires people and gets them excited about living a spectacular life, a thriving life. I've got 14 other books out there that are much more exciting than my serious ones on immigration. And so, yeah, that's my website, and it'll take you to my Facebook page. I also have a serious Facebook page. It's just named Frosty Wooldridge. And on that page, I deal with the immigration invasion of our country. I bring up all the facts and the realities that we're facing and that our children are going to face if we don't change course. So hopefully, and I hope everyone listening today, I hope you take a deep breath on this. I know it's very sobering, and yet I'm an optimist and I'm an American, and I think we can change our country toward a thriving and viable civilization by our actions today. And so it also, everyone listening, go to numbersusa.org, and that website has got 9 million Americans of all colors, of all religions, of both sides of the aisle. And it has two downloads, one 5-minute one called Immigration, Gumballs, and Poverty. And you send that out to all of your friends to educate them. And then the other one is Immigration Off the Charts. and that shows what's going to happen to our country if we continue all of this illegal immigration and mass immigration. It's going to grow this country from the current 330 million to well over 625 million people. And so we don't want to do that. We want to change course and get a stable society and a stable civilization that's sustainable. And you're part of that because a constitutional republic is not a spectator sport. You got to jump in and you got to chase it down, and you got to grab a club and go after it. And you got to do it in your community. You've got to do it in your state. You've got to do it here in the United States. And so that website, join it, and they're doing everything they can to stop illegal immigration at numbers, it's numbersusa.org. And those two videos are absolutely extraordinary. If everybody watched those two videos in this country, we would have a massive outcry to stop this invasion of our country.
Well, I'm looking at that page right now, and I put a link to your fun website, your travel website, from my website, and hopefully that'll send some traffic over there. And I'll get this one linked up there as well as we get further into the show. Okay, so basically, it seems like the vast majority of Americans understand there is a problem with the illegal immigrants. And again, right. I want to draw a line between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. Most people, especially here in Hawaii, very open-armed about legal immigrants coming on in. But the illegals are bringing in all kinds of problems. And there was a member of the European Parliament a while back who had this very telling quote, if you import the third world into your country, you're going to have third world problems. And that's exactly what we're starting to see here in the United States of America. So we all know it's a major problem. Trump knows it's a problem. Most Republicans know it's a problem. But we're seeing this Democratic intransigence. They basically are trying to flood this nation with illegal immigrants, to change the demographics of the nation, to flip it from red to blue. And we know during the midterm elections, California was a very telling indicator of how they're playing this game, because California traditionally has been Republican, but because of all the illegal immigrants being sent into key districts that were just slightly red, and then they're getting registered to vote Democrat, and it flipped those districts blue, and that's why the House of Representatives succeeded in winning so many seats in the midterm elections. And it's fraudulent. Illegal immigrants are not supposed to vote, but apparently the Democrats are willing to subject our entire country to this kind of deterioration just to hang on to power. And to me, this borders on the treasonous. It is certainly a betrayal of the American people. And when you couple that with all of this liberal nonsense about how all the world's problems can be blamed on white heterosexual males, it's almost like they really are trying to replace the population of the United States of America, to get rid of white people, to get rid of legal Americans, and bring in all these third world citizens who can be relied on to vote Democratic. Anyway, we have to take yet another break for commercials. Frosty, stay on the line. We'll be back after these few words. Okay, Frosty, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm speaking right here.
Okay, good. Well, we had a little bit of a technical glitch there where we lost our intro music, and I wasn't sure I was still hooked up here. The joys of live radio. Okay, so we're talking about illegal immigration, specifically illegal immigration, and the tremendous costs to our country, our culture, our society. The cohesiveness of our society is being stressed by all of this. And it all seems to be about Democratic votes and people willing to work for less than minimum wage. And again, we have laws, Title VIII, that are simply not being enforced. And, you know, Trump, his focus is on the wall. And walls do work. There was a TV station in San Diego got contacted by CNN to do a piece on the wall down there on their border with Mexico. And then when the report came on back with people saying the wall works, CNN dumped it. They didn't want to hear that. They were looking for people to say, oh, the wall is useless, the wall doesn't work. And again, pushing that whole agenda. And but again, there's a huge part of our border that is simply unprotected. Personally, I think they ought to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. And again, back in 2006, there was actually a bill that was passed by Congress, including a lot of the same Democrats who are saying no to Trump's wall today, that was supposed to pay for 700 miles of border wall. And only 30 miles got built, and nobody ever asked what happened to the rest of the money or why was it stopped. And so everybody's playing politics with this. And to me, I find it absolutely appalling that the Democratic Party is perfectly willing to see all of this harm come to our society for the sake of a few additional votes every election.
I would certainly agree with you. And even Dianne Feinstein, the senator from California, actually railed against illegal immigration 15 years ago, and so did Charles Schumer, and so did Nancy Pelosi. But they have found that all of these illegals who are now beginning to vote through motor voter laws in California, certainly in New York, and beyond that, they're making big impact. And instead of caring for their country and American citizens, I never forget that Nancy Pelosi a year or so ago was welcoming all these illegal immigrants, saying that they were the future of America. I would really have every person listening to this broadcast understand that because of illegal immigration and mass immigration, white America will become the new minority at 49% by 2042, which is about 22 or 3 years from now. And the crisis is this. The Constitution was created by European Americans. It's the finest act of the greatest Constitution the world's ever seen. And it gave an extraordinary opportunity for people to be free to think and act and go to church as they wish. And that's not happening in third world countries. You can't do that in the Middle East. You certainly can't do that in Africa. You can't do that in all these other unfree, if you will, or dictatorial countries like China. And so we have to ask ourselves, at one point, European Americans were 90% of the population of the United States, 7% black, 3% Hispanic, and Mexican, Latino. Well, the Latino, Mexican, Hispanic aspect will become the new majority by 2042, according to the Pew Research Center. I'm not sure that having such a demographic shift and making the dominant, successful, and driving force for America, and then change it into some other country or some other culture, and certainly some other language, is going to be good for anybody, especially since this culture and language has been so successful. The second point I wanted to make is you talk about the diseases. Well, I'm a former Medical Service Corps officer, United States Army. I'm also a former cardiac catheterization medical tech. And having traveled all over the world, I've seen all these diseases. Tuberculosis now kills around 2 million people a year. Well, we're importing not only tuberculosis into this country, but multi-drug resistant tuberculosis is coming in on those illegal aliens because they're not getting checked at the border by the CDC. They're simply coming in here and carrying that. They're also carrying worms in their bodies. They're carrying head lice, and that head lice gets transferred to our own American students. These third world people don't have the hygiene or the sanitation habits. As a matter of fact, the Somalis that are coming into our country come from a bush of Africa, and they have never used a toilet. And you're now seeing all sorts of consequences to that. And you're seeing in Los Angeles, and I just bicycled the West Coast last summer. That's what I did, Canada to Mexico on the West Coast. I rode my bicycle right through San Francisco with 11,000 homeless. And when I got to LA, it was even worse, and they are defecating on the streets.
Yes.
They are urinating on the streets. Their bottles, cans, and plastic and garbage are on the streets. But then you get to LA, 90,000 people are living in tarp tents and in blue tarps, and they're just living the lives of the homeless. And yet we're not able to do anything about that because we're paying out, again, $296 billion a year for all of these illegals across 15 federal agencies when we should be taking care of our own American citizens and trying to do something with that 100,000 homeless people in San Francisco and LA. Here in Denver, where I live, we have 10,000 homeless. Doesn't it make sense that we do something for our citizens, like jobs, like job training, like some kind of housing, makeshift, some kind of solutions, drug and alcohol counseling and or medical care, rather than, as you all know, we're quibbling over $5 billion when we've spent $6 trillion. I want you to make sure you understand that. We have spent in 17 years in Iraq and Afghanistan $6 trillion, T as in trillion dollars, building walls across all of those countries and protecting them, when we have allowed Mexico to completely usurp our country, our borders, and we're quibbling about $5 billion compared to $6 trillion. So you're seeing that the Democrats definitely are making this case on a political stance, not on a reasonable or rational or fair sense of protecting the American people. The key is, do you want that to continue? And I say, let's stop it. Let's literally build a technological wall, a real wall. I was down on the wall. I've got a picture on my Facebook page right now, Frosty Wooldridge. Go see me. I'm standing there with a 30-foot wall over my head as I reach the Mexican border south of San Diego. Walls do work. They work in the DMZ, certainly in South Korea. They work in Israel. They work in Austria. They're working in Hungary. Walls do work. It's a part of what we need to do, not only with drones and more of the U.S. Border Patrol and more big eyes in the sky and all of that, to stop the drug flow, stop the illegals, and protect our country and our citizens from this invasion.
Well, it does seem sometimes like the illegal immigrants and the refugees are getting a better deal from the federal government than the legal American citizens. And again, the way that we solve this problem, remember, Eisenhower shut down illegal immigration during his term in office. It was called Operation Wetback, which would have the liberals just screaming bloody murder over the offensiveness of that term. But he called it Operation Wetback, and he shut down the cross-border traffic with like 10% of the resources that Border Patrol and ICE have today. And the way that you make this problem go away is you start enforcing those parts of Title VIII which send people to jail for employing illegal immigrants, for housing illegal immigrants, for transporting illegal immigrants. All of these mayors and governors of these sanctuary cities and sanctuary states ought to be in jail for aiding and abetting this problem. And I don't understand why Trump doesn't just reach into Title VIII and say, okay, all of you helping these illegal immigrants, you are guilty of a crime. Because if you cut off all the free stuff that's luring the people here, they're going to stop coming here. They're not going to step over that border knowing that they can't find food, they can't find work, they can't find shelter. They're going to turn around, go back to their country and try and make that country better rather than come up here and take advantage of the country that you and I have built.
That's exactly right. And again, every person listening, I would urge you, I would invite you, in fact, implore you. This is your country. This is our country. We're in this together. And, I've already called my two senators and House rep just this week. And I said, look, I'm tired of you dithering and dawdling about, doing nothing and not getting out in front of this situation. You should have solved this long before it came to a crisis level, and you haven't. You need to pass and enforce E-Verify and
Yes.
or simply enforce Title VIII. Of the federal law right now. You need to absolutely take away any and all benefits for illegal immigrants because they're going to keep using them, and I'm paying for them, and I'm tired of it. And then I told them, you got to stop anchor babies, put a new amendment in to stop the anchor baby loophole and of the 14th Amendment and stop that particular draw. And you absolutely need to stand up and serve American citizens rather than foreigners. This is our country. We're not here to serve the whole rest of the world. The whole rest of the world needs to start fixing its own problems. And in fact, The Dalai Lama last year said that all these immigrants pouring into Western countries need to go back to their own countries and fix their own countries.
I agree. And, but again, the problem is, and we're seeing this both here in the United States and in Europe, people are being lured here by the globalists. And one of the reasons there have been so many problems in Europe is that the migrants will get there and they've been made all these promises of stuff that they're going to get. The promises, of course, aren't being kept. They've been suckered in. And so as a result, they start acting out. They start reverting back to crime. Sweden is now the rape capital of all of Europe. And it's a huge problem because, you're trying to blend together cultures that are incompatible. There have been some rather abusive cases in Europe of some of these migrants committing rapes and being basically not going to jail because the judge is saying, well, they don't understand, it's illegal here. Whatever happened to ignorance of the law is no excuse?
That's exactly correct. As a matter of fact, my brother lives in Europe for the last 30 years, and he is watching Norway literally be immigrated to death and their cultures being destroyed by these African immigrants who have no compatibility, no skills, no intellectual horsepower to function in a first world country. It's even worse in Malmo and Stockholm, Sweden, because they've literally overloaded themselves, and these people all live on welfare. That's all they live on. And then they're out robbing, they're burning cars now. Every weekend you have dozens and dozens, and over the Christmas and certainly over New Year's, they're torching cars by the hundreds in places like Paris. I've been to Paris several times. There are now 90 no-go zones there in Paris. As a matter of fact, for those of you who appreciate this, I just was in Detroit, Michigan last fall and also in Minneapolis. We now have no-go zones here in America, and places like Detroit. If you're not a Muslim, you don't dare go into those areas. And if you're a woman that's going into those areas, you're in deep trouble because they are now practicing Sharia law with their Sharia patrols. And if you don't bow down and cover yourself and absolutely make yourself minimized as a woman in Minneapolis and or in Detroit, you could find yourself raped quite easily because you can't. These people don't change culture just because they came to a first world country. They are maintaining that 6th century, very dark, very violent religion called Islam, and our citizens are going to continue to pay because, as I've written in some of my columns, these immigrants are creating literally parallel societies that are functioning within our society but have nothing to do with our society.
Well, it's an ugly, ugly situation here, and of course, I remember another time when, and certainly we see this with the legal immigrants, when they come on in, they do want to adapt to our culture, our laws, our language. But it is a rather alarming phenomenon of all the illegals and the migrants that they're coming into the United States of America and demanding that we change our country to be just like the one that they left. Well, if the country that they left was really all that great, why aren't they still there? Why come up here and demand that we turn into what it is they ran away from? And again, migration and immigration, it's a filtering process. We're not getting the best of the people from the source countries. The people who are successful in their home countries, they stay there. They've got no reason to leave. What we're getting are people who weren't making it in their home countries. We're getting people who are fleeing criminal prosecution. We're getting MS-13. We're getting drug smugglers. We're getting people who really weren't functional in their home country, and we let them across the border, and they're no more functional here in the United States of America. And it is costing a huge amount of money. It's eroding our culture and our society. And I think Americans have a right to be angry, and we do need to support Donald Trump on getting this wall built. And for those people who've been injured by the government shutdown, you have my deepest sympathies. But the blame for that goes right to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, who are playing politics with everybody's lives, not just members of Congress, but with literally every legal American citizen. They're just playing their little games, to get their political points and to get their votes here. Anyway, Frosty, we got to take one more commercial break. We're going to be back with the last segment of our program after a few words from commercials. So please stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program today here. We're finishing up with Frosty Wooldridge. And Frosty, we are going to have you back here again. This is such an important issue. And the other day we were talking about the fact that apparently there is some $21 trillion unaccounted for in federal spending, a large chunk of which is going to HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Now, HUD is the government agency that hands out housing vouchers. And I'm wondering how much of that missing money went to basically provide housing vouchers for illegal immigrants, because with 25 million of them in this country, that's a lot of housing vouchers.
There's no question that the fraud that's going on in the federal government right now is being hidden on so many different levels. And if each and every one of you listening to this broadcast today understands the certitude and the sincerity of my voice, and that I study this, and I'm a citizen journalist, and I absolutely want to see our society, our country, our civilization succeed, we need to have the truth break open. We need to have patriots who are exposing what's going on. Certainly the 17 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's a whole bunch of fraud going on there. The $6 trillion that you and I have paid out in taxes, parenting, that's what I'm looking for. And we can only do that if we have a viable society, again, with a single language and a single culture that we all adhere to and we identify with and that we love. And so I'd love to come back, Michael, and really not only talk about this, but engage everybody to take action. If everybody is calling up their 2 senators, their House reps, if they're going to their PTA meeting, if they're stopping the sanctuary cities, there's over 240 sanctuary cities. Those are against federal law. No one, no mayor and no governor should have a sanctuary state or a sanctuary city or a sanctuary school. It's against the laws of the United States of America. And either we are a country and a land of the rule of law, or we will break down and become a third world country where a third world country, corruption is a mechanism by which third world countries operate. Again.
Well, we're certainly there already. Anyway, Frosty, thank you for spending the hour with us. We're going to have to let you go here. We'll have you back on the show really soon. Now, little program note. Tomorrow's radio show will be a replay. I have been summoned for jury duty, and hopefully they'll just take one look at me and kick me out the door, and I'll be back here live on Wednesday. And if that little custom T-shirt store hadn't gone out of business, I was going to get a T-shirt that said "Death Penalty for Parking Violations." But I am going to be in there reading the rules for jurors, and hopefully they'll kick me out on that one. So again, it's a replay for tomorrow. I will be updating the website from the courthouse and keeping that up to date. And hopefully I won't be away from the radio for too long. Okay. So there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We need it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.